What would you do if, in the blink of an eye, your carefully curated life exploded? If everything you thought was private, sacred, untouchable, suddenly became public, dissected by millions around the world, and weaponized against you? That was exactly the nightmare Prince Harry faced one chilly evening in Montecito, California, a place he once called his sanctuary, his escape from the glare of royal life, the prying eyes of tabloids, and the relentless weight of expectation. But sanctuary can turn into a trap when secrets come knocking in the form of photographs that no one should have seen. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. It started with a single tweet. One tweet that carried with it the power to ignite a global media storm, upend relationships, and force a prince to question everything he believed about loyalty, family, and love. On that day, Piers Morgan, the British journalist whose reputation for controversy is matched only by his relentless pursuit of stories that shock the public, published what would become the most talked-about scandal of the year: photos of Meghan Markle on a private yacht, sitting side by side with Prince Andrew. The images weren't just photos. They were a signal, a spark, a Pandora's box that once opened could never be closed. For Harry, the reaction was immediate and visceral. He had been living in Montecito with a sense of cautious optimism, believing that distance from the UK, from the palace, and from the constant media scrutiny would shield him from drama. He and Meghan had worked hard to craft a life that balanced celebrity with normalcy, a life where their children could grow up away from intrusion, where social appearances were carefully curated, and where every movement wasn't analyzed under a microscope. That life, that fragile bubble, burst the moment the photos hit the internet. Imagine sitting in your living room, your phone buzzing endlessly, notifications piling up by the second, messages from friends, family, and legal advisors blurring together in a cacophony of panic. Imagine watching as news outlets across the world dissect every frame of a photograph, speculate on every glance, and attach words like scandal, betrayal, and impropriety to the person you love most. That was Harry's reality, a reality that no amount of privilege could protect him from. But let's pause for a moment and ask the question everyone wants to know: why would Meghan Markle even be photographed with Prince Andrew? The optics were explosive. Prince Andrew, already a controversial figure in the public eye, now seen in casual camaraderie with Meghan, the Duchess of Sussex, ignited speculation that crossed boundaries Harry and Meghan had spent years trying to protect. Was it a simple meeting? A chance encounter? Or was there a hidden agenda, a layer of deception waiting to be uncovered? Piers Morgan's expose didn't answer these questions. It multiplied them, creating a perfect storm of doubt, suspicion, and outrage. And yet, the photos themselves were just the tip of the iceberg. Beneath the glossy images of sun-drenched decks and sparkling ocean waves lay an entire narrative of secrecy, tension, and intrigue that no one outside that yacht could possibly imagine. Every angle of the photograph seemed to tell a different story, and every story carried a weight that Harry, in Montecito, could feel pressing down on him like a storm cloud he couldn't outrun. Harry's first instinct was disbelief. How could this happen? How could something so private reach the public domain so quickly, so efficiently, and with such devastating consequences? Questions flooded his mind. Who leaked the photos? Who benefited from their exposure? And most urgently, how could he protect his family, his wife, and himself from the fallout that was sure to follow? In moments like these, even the most composed figures, people accustomed to scrutiny, pressure, and public life, find themselves vulnerable, raw, and searching for a way out. The Montecito mansion, which once symbolized freedom, now felt suffocating. Every room seemed to echo with whispers of betrayal. Every hallway carried the weight of uncertainty. Harry paced from the study to the balcony, staring out at the manicured gardens that seemed to mock his helplessness. Even in isolation, he was exposed. Even in a mansion guarded by security, surrounded by distance from the palace, the world was at his doorstep. And every second that ticked by brought another headline, another post, another comment dissecting Meghan's choices, Harry's reactions, and the implications for the royal family as a whole. The media frenzy that followed the release of the yacht photos was unprecedented, even for someone like Harry, who had grown up in the eye of the storm. Journalists descended like vultures, speculative commentary filled airwaves and timelines, and public opinion fractured into factions of outrage, disbelief, and defense. Social media exploded in real time, with millions weighing in, commenting, and sharing the photos, each opinion amplifying the pressure on Harry and Meghan. It was no longer just a private crisis. It was a public spectacle, a trial by media, and a test of endurance and strategy. And what made this situation even more combustible was the tangled web of connections behind the scenes. The palace, always sensitive to optics and protocol, reportedly began internal discussions, cautious and calculated. Advisors, aides, and family members analyzed every angle, every potential consequence, and every possible fallout from the exposure. Meanwhile, Harry was forced to navigate not just the emotional impact, but also the strategic implications. His decisions now had weight beyond personal consequence. They could shape narratives, impact public perception, and even influence political relationships. The emotional toll was immense. Harry, who had spent years advocating for privacy, mental health, and family security, found himself once again thrust into a maelstrom of speculation and scrutiny. The sense of betrayal was sharp, cutting, and deeply personal. The question of trust became paramount. Who in their circle could be relied upon? Who was complicit, knowingly or unknowingly, in allowing these photos to surface? And perhaps most importantly, how could he shield his family from the harsh, unforgiving glare of global attention? At the same time, the stakes extended beyond personal and emotional realms. The yacht photos, combined with the narratives constructed around them, had the potential to reshape public opinion, influence media narratives, and even affect the Sussexes' future plans. Harry, caught between the instinct to protect and the reality of exposure, had to make a decision that no one envied: stay and confront the storm in Montecito, or retreat, regroup, and find a path forward, one that might take him home in ways he hadn't anticipated. This is where the story becomes more than a scandal. It becomes a study in human response to betrayal, media intrusion, and the clash between private life and public spectacle. It becomes about a man who, despite privilege, status, and wealth, is still vulnerable to the forces of perception, rumor, and exposure. And it becomes about choices that carry weight not just for himself, but for everyone he loves. So, where does Harry go from here? Montecito, once a refuge, is no longer safe. The media, the public, and even those closest to him have become players in a high-stakes game he didn't choose but cannot avoid. And as the night deepens and the notifications continue, Harry realizes that this is more than a crisis. It's a crossroads. By the end of this video, you'll see why this one scandal, the yacht photos, the exposure by Piers Morgan, the fallout in Montecito, may rewrite Harry and Meghan's entire story. But first, we have to step back and look at how this all started, how the images surfaced, and why the ripple effects are more profound than anyone could have predicted. And if you think you know the story from the headlines, think again. The truth is far more twisted, far more personal, and far more shocking than anyone has reported. Because in this story, every image tells a story, every reaction carries weight, and every decision, Harry's decision to stay or go, will set off a chain of events that no one saw coming. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What do you do when the place you thought was a sanctuary starts feeling like a cage? That's exactly what Prince Harry realized as he paced the marble halls of his Montecito mansion, his mind racing faster than the storm clouds gathering over the California coastline. The yacht photos had landed like a bomb. One moment, life was peaceful, insulated, private. The next, it felt like the walls themselves were listening, like every shadow hid a potential leak. Every ring of the phone was another crisis waiting to explode. Harry had spent years trying to create a life that balanced the impossible, a royal past and a Hollywood present, a family that could grow up with some semblance of normality, and a wife whose public perception he knew would forever be scrutinized. Montecito had promised privacy, a place where he could breathe without the constant gaze of cameras. But privacy is fragile. It's a thin veil easily pierced by scandal. And now, that veil had been ripped apart. The mansion, with its sprawling gardens, infinity pools, and towering walls, had once been a symbol of freedom. But freedom feels different when every visitor, every aide, every passing car could be an informant. Even his security team, highly trained and loyal, couldn't shield him from the invisible eyes of the internet. Harry felt exposed in ways he hadn't since his childhood, when the paparazzi lurked behind every hedge and tree in his family's estates. He thought distance would make a difference. He thought moving across the ocean would create a buffer between him and the chaos. He was wrong. He sat in the study, staring at the stack of printed screenshots of social media posts, headlines, and comments. Some were vicious, some incredulous, and some almost sympathetic, but all of them pierced his sense of safety. Meghan's phone was constantly buzzing beside him, messages coming from friends, advisors, and media consultants. Even the familiar voices of allies now carried undertones of panic. "Did you see this?" they asked. "What are you going to do?" Harry felt the weight of responsibility pressing down, not just for himself, but for Meghan, for their children, for every decision that would ripple out in ways he couldn't predict. He ran a hand through his hair. The storm wasn't just outside the mansion, it was inside him, inside every conversation he had that day. Every glance at the news cycle made his chest tighten. What would the public think? How would the palace respond? Would Meghan be blamed? And most importantly, how could they survive this without shattering completely? Harry's routine, once methodical and comforting, was now punctuated by anxiety. Morning coffee no longer brought calm, it brought dread. Meetings with security were tense, every discussion a reminder that danger could take the form of exposure, not violence. Even the children's laughter, which usually provided a grounding warmth, felt fragile, an ephemeral sound that could be stolen at any moment by headlines or leaks. He realized something unsettling. Montecito was no longer a refuge. It was a gilded cage. Yet leaving wasn't simple. To walk away from Montecito wasn't just to leave property. It was to abandon a carefully constructed haven. Every inch of the mansion, from the sprawling garden terraces to the private screening room, had been chosen with purpose. It represented a life they had tried to build outside the gaze of the public. Walking away now would feel like defeat, but staying might be even more dangerous. Harry considered his options. He could remain, fight the media onslaught, defend Meghan, and try to contain the narrative. But containment in the age of viral content is an illusion. Once images like the yacht photos are out, control is a fantasy. He could leave, retreat into another space, another private location, but then the questions would follow him. Why run? What are you hiding? Running wouldn't erase the scandal. It would only change its trajectory. And then there were the personal stakes. Harry was not just thinking as a public figure. He was thinking as a husband and father. Meghan had been forced to endure relentless scrutiny, her image dissected and debated like a commodity. Their children, too young to understand the complexities of royal scandal, were still sensitive to tension, to stress, to the unspoken anxiety that hung in the air. Every decision had consequences that could affect them long after the headlines faded. The mansion itself seemed to echo his turmoil. The grand hallways, lined with art and photographs, became a maze of memories and regrets. He wandered from room to room, touching objects that once brought joy but now seemed to highlight fragility. The place where Meghan had planned her first garden party, the study where he had sketched out his future plans, the living room where they had laughed freely on quiet afternoons. Each space now carried the weight of intrusion, of vulnerability. Harry tried to focus on breathing, on slowing his thoughts, but the media was relentless. News outlets speculated endlessly, with analysis that ranged from plausible to absurd. Some suggested collusion, others painted Meghan as careless, and a few questioned Harry's judgment. Social media became a storm of commentary, and even well-meaning friends could only offer so much support. It was an emotional barrage that left Harry raw, angry, and exhausted. He thought about his family in the UK, the expectations, the unspoken rules, the formalities that had once constrained him. Distance had offered relief, a chance to step outside the strictures of palace life. But even oceans could not insulate him from scandal when the reach of a single tweet could span continents in seconds. It was a reminder that privacy, once lost, can never be fully regained. And yet, amid all this, Harry felt a flicker of determination. He knew that retreating, even temporarily, was not a sign of weakness. It could be strategic. He had survived the glare of the British press, the prying eyes of photographers, and the relentless pressure of public expectation before. He had built a life that balanced exposure and privacy, a life that he was unwilling to let be dismantled by a single leak. The question was, how would he act? And could he protect the people he loved while navigating this storm? But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming.